happy to turn the program over to Bonita Banducci.
I've sung Amazing Grace so many times for this fellowship. It's just been a really special privilege and experience with me. I love it. And this is very unusual for me to be able to frame the work I've been doing on understanding gender differences in the context of grace. But for me, it has been a grace trail, a trail of moments of finding myself suddenly seeing and suddenly being found when I didn't even realize how lost I was or how blind I was. And so I want to take you on the grace trail with me today. And I'm curious to know how many of you have had those moments of insights, particularly about what we're talking about relationships between men and women, about differences. How many people have done some reading and understanding? Yeah, because I'm sure many, it's a wonderful talk about adventure or discovery, certainly. And for me, it started out right out of college when I was given the opportunity to bring the health food industry out of the back streets of America and the hippie culture and manage a store on Union Square in San Francisco. My background was in sociology, not in business, although I was raised in a business family. And my mother had insisted I take some business courses even in high school. And it was my relationship with my boss, however, that first had me, be intrigued by why are we so different the way we see things? I was so passionate about providing for the customers what they wanted. And for him it was, we got to follow the rules, cash flow, the business attributes that were so rigorous that didn't allow me really to easily do what I wanted to do. But I figured out how to do my way and his way. And we created a very successful business. It was a grace moment during that time. A customer who had been one of those kinds of customers that I had just left alone. Some people you just serve them best by letting them do their thing. But he came up to me one day and he said, "I can't figure something out." He said, "This store is so well run without a hint of authoritarianism." And I was kind of like, well, thank you. And then my second thought was, I know where the authoritarian is, but he was the one that had taught me that a store takes on the personality of either the owner or the strong manager. And I knew that the store had taken on the personality of the strong manager. And as that customer walked out the door, I said to myself, I wonder if it has anything to do with my being a woman. Fast forward, reading management gurus, I was, continued to be curious because it seemed to be that what these management gurus of those days were talking about was the way I thought. And it was finally in the early 90s when I was reading a fellow by the name of Peter Senge. He was talking about how we needed a systems way of thinking rather than a more linear way and compartmentalized way of thinking about business. That I finally said, okay, I closed the book, I said, somebody's got to start talking about this is the way women think. And I guess it's going to be me. I was fortunate enough to have an opportunity, of course that was another grace moment. I was fortunate enough then to have an opportunity, speaking with some of my business friends, to take on a project with what was then Sun Microsystems. Because one of the presidents of the divisions had been very curious and wanted to do an offsite with his executives and do some research within the organization about what is the strategic advantage women bring to an organization in the global marketplace. Then we were supposedly really competing against Japan. It was a different kind of environment. But I had the opportunity to do the research and interview women and men within the organization. And my big grace moment came when I interviewed Carol Bartz, who was then president of worldwide sales, second in command of Sun Microsystems. I asked her, what did she bring to the organization that would not be there if she wasn't there? What did she bring to the executives? And she said, well, the guys, they're pretty much prioritizing their thinking. They take the highest priority problem, highest priority solution, put the solution against the problem, and fight any fires that happen as a result. And for me, I like to prevent fires. I like to connect all these different elements of the organization, whether it's, I'm in sales, but there's R&D, and there's HR, and there's marketing, certainly. And I was thrilled, because for me that represented the way I thought, and this systems way of thinking. And then she added something. She said, and for this I'm considered to be not a team player. Now, that was startling to me. So ask yourself, how could it not be being a team player? And if you use sports analogies, we can look at, well, she wasn't following the call of the quarterback. She was bringing in her own ideas, meaning that either the quarterback or the coach would be the CEO. She was getting into other people's turfs. And ultimately, complex solutions stalls the action. Can't just move ahead. So, in that moment, I could see that not only are there different, what I call different competencies, that what I also call more relational people bring, but that there is a different interpretation of what competency is, and a misinterpretation. And I could see, with work that I've done since, see that many of these relational competencies have been systematically filtered out of the organization. She managed to be very successful in raising to that level. And I think I consider Carol to be pretty ambidextrous in that regard. But it was there, that was my big aha that said, okay, I've got to devote my life to this one. And it was also followed up by interviews with executives in the organization. So I had the opportunity to hear what their perceptions were, and I was specifically asking, what are your perceptions about why women aren't being promoted? And because we already had the numbers, we knew the data. Glass ceiling then was at the director level. And it was at that level that people became spokespeople for the company. So it was like, okay, keep them out of speaking for the company. But in any case, what I found was another pattern, as exemplified by one executive who said, well, women just aren't ready yet. And I hear this. And by the way, I'm going to stop right now and let you know, I'm really for the partnership of men and women. I'm completely, this is all about that fiery, wonderful time, so creative in that little store on Union Square. I'm completely clear now that it came because the two of us were working together. I just want to remove the pain of not understanding why we're so different. So if I'm making, kind of jokes about men and women, and I want us to laugh together at ourselves, and have compassion, and learn and teach each other. So women aren't ready yet. So I asked him, well, what would ready look like? And that's one of the tools that I encourage people. What does it look like? And he said, well, they'd be competent. And I said, okay, this is real. And are there any familiar, any things familiar? Okay. And so I said, what does competency look like? And he said, they'd be able to get right to the heart of the matter. Women keep bringing in all this peripheral stuff. There it was again, the blindness and the misinterpretation of what I'm now finding relational people bring as a very strong competency. what I call connecting the dots, or systems thinking. So those were some of my grace moments that brought me to develop an approach, a way of looking at gender differences, not just as traits or styles, or sometimes people say different values, but what I've come to put into language of competencies. And I'm strategic about this because we want these to be recognized in the world of skills and action and results and objects. So I've actually I identify them as competencies. So, and I teach at Santa Clara University a class called Gender and Engineering. I have students from all over the world who are engineers. Some of them are in engineering management, but most of them are pretty solid engineers. And it is a joy to see their grace moments and their discoveries of understanding these gender differences as I frame them as competencies. Now, one of them I've talked about, the connecting the dots. Well, I'm gonna backtrack here a little bit. One of my favorite news stories about connecting the dots happened recently. It's not exactly a pleasant topic, but it was at 9/11, over 10 years ago, that I was taken with George Bush's most brilliant statement that we hadn't connected the dots around 9/11. Do any of you remember that? And then what happened? We discovered that there was a woman who was head of an agency, an FBI agency in Michigan, who had actually identified that there had been a student pilot who had told his instructor that he didn't need to learn how to land, he only needed to learn how to fly. And she had spotted that. Her agency had spotted it and communicated to Washington as a possible terrorist threat. But no one listened. Now, fast forward 10 years, guess who the CIA agent who connected the dots, who found Osama bin Laden was? It's a woman. So, you know, we can say it can be small contributions, it can also have contributions of global scope, this different way of thinking, and connecting the dots. So you'll have that opportunity to see, you know, it's a very controversial movie coming out, but apparently very good, so you'll be able to see her and all that she did with the very diverse and extensive team that she worked with in the new movie coming out this next year, in January. So, let me also say that I wanted to connect this right relationship to your covenant, because discovering our blind spots, our gender differences, the cultural lenses that we're wearing, contributes and enriches relationships, fulfilling on the covenant to respect the contribution each person makes. Your words are to respect the contribution of each person, to see the truth in the juxtaposition and interaction of differing views. Boy, how I would love for our Congress to be able to say, how can we balance individual rights and group responsibility? Because that's another competency, or a part of the lens. It's focusing on rights, or it's focusing on responsibility. We need both. To recognize and honor the diversity among us, to learn from each other, to share our needs and concerns. Now, one of the other ways of looking at this, in leadership training, often we talk about what we don't know, we don't know. In gender differences, I like to frame this as what women know and they don't know how they know it, and what men know and they don't know that they don't really know. So, yes, we all need to laugh. In fact, I have a special workshop now, just recently, called Calling Out the Brilliance of Women, because so many women think the way they think is common sense. Now, one story I have is I was at a panel at Stanford about getting more women on boards. And this one woman, she was on 4 boards of major companies. And she was asked from the audience, not myself, the same question I'd asked Carol Bartz about what is it she brought to the board. And she said, common sense. There was kind of a pause in the audience. Common sense, what does that mean about the men? What does it, you mean, can't she say something great about herself? And then she was asked if she would advocate for more women on boards. And she said no, she couldn't advocate for more women. She had to advocate for people with experience and track record and abilities, etc. So I pulled her aside afterwards and asked her, actually I said, I asked her to listen to my story about Carol Bartz. And then I asked her if that's what she meant by common sense, this systems way of thinking. And she said, yes. And she got it immediately, that she should be framing what she brings as systems thinking or connecting the dots. And then I asked her, could you advocate for more systems thinkers on boards? And she said, yes, of course. So that was done. But that's the kind of, the blindness that often relational people have about thinking that, this is common sense, everyone should know this. And that we need to be able to speak out and frame this as these ways of thinking as a competency. Just like now, I also frame the fact that customer focus, everyone knows what customer focus is, right? Well, it's different. For me, customer focus is getting into the shoes of the customer and looking from there. For my boss, it was, I know what's best for the customer. And for many of my engineering students, they know engineering. But I had one engineering student that actually turned around. He realized he was so infatuated with his vendor about this technology that they were developing for a customer, and all of a sudden he realized they lost sight of what the customer wanted because he had been in this class. And he said, hey, we got to turn this all around. The technology is great, but hey, we got to focus on what the customer wants. So again, this being able to frame these differences as competencies. Another real important one, let me see, the devil's advocate. How many people here are really great devil's advocate players? Okay? Well, and I will challenge you, there are probably different ways that you play devil's advocate. That this is another, in terms of, we talk about women and being blind to their brilliance and thinking that they think about common sense. What men often don't realize is that devil's advocate is one way of bulletproofing an idea or developing an idea. I had the opportunity to work with a group of executives at our local space agency in Silicon Valley. And one of the executives, I had heard him say earlier to my presentation that his greatest concern was that there were no new ideas bubbling up from the organization. So I made note of that. And we did an exercise. I show a video about Gary playing devil's advocate with Leslie and how Gary pokes holes in Leslie's ideas and finally Leslie shuts down and just, let's go. And I asked, well, what if Gary's playing devil's advocate, which he says he's doing, what is Leslie doing? And most people will say, well, Leslie's just defending herself. Well, one of the men in one of my workshops said, why don't we call it angel's advocate? It's really what I normally would say is collaboration, but I've even found that some people think that devil's advocate is collaboration. But building ideas on an idea. And so I presented this video at the space agency. and had them all do an exercise playing first devil's advocate and then angel's advocate, presenting ideas to each other. And afterwards, I spoke to this executive particularly. I asked everyone, what is it that you got out of the exercise? And he said to me, Bonita, you know, we do science here. Devil's advocate is science. And I said, yeah, I got it, okay? And he said, but we had so much fun with all the new ideas bubbling up in the exercise. We didn't even switch to devil's advocate. And he used the same expression of the ideas bubbling up, and they decided they were going to do an offsite just for people to present new ideas and not play devil's advocate and shift the culture so that there could be more sense that you could work together to build ideas rather than having to stand up in front of a firing squad. So these are examples of some of the differences and the way I've framed them. We'll be doing more in the talk afterwards. I have some lists of both the gender lens. Relational has to do with looking through a lens of relationship and interconnectedness, not only between people, but other ideas, etc., different events. Individualistic is what I frame as mostly men's culture and lens, and there are people that are in between, absolutely, that are both. Individualistic is more focused on a hierarchy, who's up and who's down, and independence. Again, we need both. And with my class, I frame this also with a computer framework of that the foundation is brain science, and we have lots of new research now in brain science that shows, for instance, that there's 10 times more white matter in women's brains that is very interconnected. So the interconnectedness of different parts of the brain shows up even in the brain science, and that there is 6 times more gray matter in men's brains. And again, this is most men, not all men, most women, not all women, and sometimes there are bridge brains. But the white matter has to do with being, the gray matter in the men's brain has to do with being focused and compartmentalized, which has its strength of its own. There are other elements like the difference of hormonal response to a stress situation or a threat. You've probably heard of the fight or flight syndrome response. Well, there's also the tend and befriend. Often more relational people, their way of responding to threat is to communicate and to talk things out. Again, I would like to see more of this at the national level, but I haven't quite gotten there yet. But in any case, this is the way I've been advocating, not just advocating, but really creating a world where people understand each other and work effectively together and producing results beyond what they would ever have known. So I'm thrilled to have the opportunity to talk with you today. We'll do more of this later. I have some worksheets, as I said, that summarize some of these differences a little bit more for you that we can talk about. And if there is an interest, I'd be happy to be doing a workshop for you the weekend of the 23rd, I think, of February, where we can go into it more and show videos and have conversation and get real life experiences. That would be my gift to the fellowship for whatever purposes that you all want. So I really thank you all very much for giving me the opportunity to share this with you on a very special day with great announcement and new relationships. Hallelujah.
Yeah.